Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Have you ever wondered what would happen if everything you believed about yourself was just a protection against who you truly are? What if your suffering was actually a desperate plea from your soul for liberation? And what if that much talked about spiritual awakening wasn't a light, but a fire? Carl Jung said that the encounter with the self is invariably a fall, not an ascent, not an instant elevation of consciousness, but a collapse, a breakdown of the lies you told yourself to survive. All of us at some quiet point in life feel that strange call, a subtle restlessness in our chest, a discomfort that doesn't come from outside, but from within. Something in us whispers, "This isn't all there is." But few have the courage to listen, because those who listen no longer sleep soundly. In this video, we will walk among the rubble of the psyche. We will talk about what no one says. Most people do not survive spiritual awakening, not because they literally die, but because they get lost along the way, because they confuse enlightenment with delusion, consciousness with an inflated ego. Spirituality was just another way to escape pain. This won't be a video to motivate you, comfort you, or offer you promises. It will be a mirror, perhaps an abyss. But if you are already tired of pretending that everything is fine, if you feel that something inside you is about to break, then maybe, just maybe, this is the conversation you needed to have. You don't perceive the exact moment it begins. There's no background music or a mystical light piercing through your bedroom curtains. The awakening doesn't arrive as it does in the movies. It comes as an uncomfortable silence that begins to corrode everything from the inside. It's when you look at your own life and feel a strange suspicion that everything you built with so much effort may have nothing to do with who you truly are. At first, it's subtle. You wake up more tired than when you went to bed. You have lunch with people who seem like characters. You work at something that drains you but doesn't fulfill you. You come home and notice that the sofa, the television, that routine are just anesthetics, and a thought begins to timidly emerge, almost shamefully. This life I am living is not mine. Carl Jung called this the beginning of differentiation. It's when the soul begins to rebel against the ego. And don't be fooled, the soul is patient. But when it decides to speak, it screams through the body, through boredom, through sudden anger, and through a nameless sadness. Some call it a crisis, others depression. Jung called it individuation and was clear. This process destroys everything that is false. It's not rosy spirituality. It's not meditating in the lotus position with scented incense. It's crying in the bathroom when you realize you spent years trying to be what others expected of you. It's looking into the eyes of someone who says, "I love you," and feeling that you are absent, that you were never really there. The call is not a light, it is a rupture. It's the soul saying, "Enough. Either you reconnect with me now, or everything comes tumbling down." And everything begins to tumble down. Friendships start to feel forced. Conversations seem empty. Food no longer tastes the same. The words "I'm fine" transform into a kind of intimate betrayal. You start to get irritated by things you used to accept. You begin to distance yourself from people who demand a lot and give little. And maybe for the first time in your life, you say no without justifying yourself. But no one understands because on the outside, everything seems normal. On the inside, however, there is a fire. You begin to question everything. Your career, your marriage, your faith. Even your own name sounds strange. And then loneliness arrives. But it's not a common loneliness. It's a kind of exile of the soul. You are surrounded by people, but no one can reach the place where you are because you don't even know where you are. This is where many give up. They return to the routine, to autopilot, to the comfortable surface, patching up the pieces with cheap motivational phrases, hiding the pain under a functional smile. and they remain dead inside. But some stay, even without understanding, still with fear, still without promises. These few accept the collapse. They allow the fantasy to burn. They allow the identity to mourn. And there, in the midst of the chaos, something is revealed. It wasn't madness, it was truth. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that requires courage, because becoming who you are means ceasing to be who the world taught you to be. It is a symbolic assassination of the ego, a slow execution of all the mass. And it's not pretty, it's visceral, it's bloody, it's almost always solitary, but it's real. The call promises you nothing. It doesn't assure you that you will find meaning. It only tells you one thing: keep going. Don't return to the lie, and that may be the hardest part. There's no going back. You can try to ignore it. You can pretend. You can numb yourself with distractions, with instant gratifications, with doses of quick and recycled spirituality. But once the soul screams, you can never sleep on the same pillow again. And deep down, you know it. Jung talked about the unconscious as a dark and deep ocean, full of monsters, traumas, and forgotten powers. When the call comes, it's as if you have fallen into that sea, and the only way to survive is to learn to swim inward. There is no going back to who you were, because who you were was never truly you. It was just a reflection, a character, a fragile arrangement of social conditionings and unfaced fears. The call is the beginning of demolition. It's when the temple of the ego begins to crack. It's when the soul finally rises from the depths and says, "I want to live." But it doesn't want your comfortable little life. It wants everything. It wants truth. It wants intensity. It wants clarity. It wants the love that isn't for sale. It wants the silence that screams. It wants the sacred, not the spiritualized. And you know it. Deep down, you always knew. You were just waiting for the right collapse, that exact crack that would finally let the light in, or the darkness escape. Before we continue, have you noticed that the more you break, the less people respect you? The problem is not feeling, it's letting that control your actions. Most people live as if it were normal to explode, give up, or justify themselves. But none of that generates respect. What does generate it is the control, the presence, and the coolness of someone who knows exactly who they are. There is a real way to develop that, and we explain it in a straightforward video without beating around the bush. Just what really works. If you want to watch it, scan the code on the screen, or click the link in the description or in the first pinned comment. Most people think that awakening is an elevation, like floating above the world's pains, reaching a higher consciousness, and finally finding peace. But the truth is that true awakening does not begin with light. It begins with the fall, a brutal, internal, silent fall, where you don't go up, you sink. You sink into everything you spent your entire life trying to avoid. This phase has been described by mystics, poets, and thinkers, but no term captures that moment as well as the one whispered by St. John of the Cross, the dark night of the soul. Carl Jung understood this process in an implacable way. He didn't romanticize it. He called it confrontation with the shadow and said that there, in that psychological abyss, there were no guarantees. The unconscious is not a blooming garden waiting for your arrival. It is a minefield of unfelt pains, denied truths, and traumas archived in the depths of the soul. It is at that point that many get lost, because awakening hurts more than ignorance, more than alienation, because it doesn't destroy the world. It destroys your world. You start to see, and what you see is not pretty. You see that much of what you called love was dependency, that success was a mask of approval, that relationships were silent contracts of emotional convenience, that the spirituality you followed was just another defense mechanism. You realize that you spent your life trying to fit into a mold that was never yours, and in trying to get out of it, you realize how much you hid, mutilated, and extinguished yourself. That's why this dark night is not poetic, it's cruel. It tears off your skin and demands that you look without distractions at who you really are when no one sees you. In that moment, many want to go back to the comfort of certainties, to prefabricated answers, to the distractions that numb you. But it's too late because now you have seen, and as Jung said, what has been seen can no longer be unseen. You try to pray, but God seems silent. You seek advice, but the words of others sound empty. You ask for help and discover that no one can cross that desert for you. The dark night is a voluntary exile. It's not the loneliness of being without company. It's the loneliness of realizing that the only true company you always avoided was your own. And that's frightening because now you are naked, without beliefs, without guarantees, without the disguise that everything is okay. It is here that the mind tries to sabotage you. It starts to call you crazy, ungrateful, weak. But it's not weakness, it's taking off your armor. You begin to come into contact with raw feelings, the shame of not having seen yourself before, the guilt of having betrayed yourself for so long, the sadness of realizing that perhaps it was all a great performance. But Jung warns us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The dark night is exactly that, making everything you swept under the psychic rug conscious. It's looking at your fears without resorting to mantras. It's confronting your ego without excuses. It's touching your wound without needing someone else to save you. And no, this won't liberate you immediately, it will break you. But in the midst of the ruins, something strange happens. You stop running, and for the first time, you begin to feel. The pain stops being a punishment and becomes a warning, a map, a whisper that says, keep going, you're getting closer. The more you descend, the closer you get to the center. But that center is not eternal peace, it's raw truth. It's you without makeup, without idealizations, without applause. And do you know what the most curious thing is? When you accept that void, it stops consuming you. You realize that the problem was not the pain, it was the resistance to it. Spiritual awakening is not a destination, it is a dismantling. It's losing everything you thought you were and discovering that something still remains. Jung called it the self, the indestructible core of the psyche. But to reach it, you need to die symbolically. Die to the persona, to the character, to the obedient child, to the competent professional, to the perfect partner, to the impeccable spiritual being. In the dark night, everything false rots, and only what is real remains. And what is real is deep, silent, but present. It is there, at the very bottom, where you find something you never knew how to name. Something that is not taught, something that brings you back to yourself. But not everyone gets there because it's not comfortable, it's not pretty, it's not marketable, it's lonely, it's raw, it's true. And that's why most people don't survive the awakening, because they prefer the comfortable lie to the unbearable truth. But if you've made it this far, maybe there is still a flame in you, even if it's small, even if it's almost extinguished, but real. And that flame is all you need. Not all flight looks like flight. Sometimes it's disguised as wisdom, inner peace, or vibrational elevation. There are those who trade vices for mantras, who substitute emotional dependency with oracles, retreats, gurus, and self-help books piled up like trophies. But if you look closely, there is still fear behind the curtain. There is still someone trying to avoid the most difficult encounter that exists, the encounter with oneself. Carl Jung called this the inflation of the spiritual ego. It is when consciousness awakens, but the ego takes control of the narrative. And instead of diving into the pain, into the shadow, into the human, the person floats away. They take refuge in the heavens so they don't have to face hell. It is subtle but brutal because this kind of spirituality doesn't heal, it conceals. It's a performance. Only now the stage is sacred. You're still acting, just with white clothes and clever phrases. How many people do you know who say, "I've overcome it," but can't stand to be alone for half an hour? How many call themselves at peace, but explode when their ego is challenged? How many preach with passion but can't tolerate someone who thinks differently? The ego is cunning, and when it feels threatened, it disguises itself as enlightenment. It makes you believe that you've already arrived, that you already know, that you already understand. But Jung warned, knowledge is an illusion when it prevents experience. You can know all the chakras and still not know how to cry. You can recite phrases from Buddha, but never have had the courage to embrace your father. You can call yourself awake, but keep running from the mirror. That is the danger of undigested spirituality. It becomes a shield against pain instead of a bridge to truth. You stop evolving and start performing. You no longer feel anger. You say you're transmuting it. You no longer feel sadness. You say you're clearing karma. You no longer face traumas. You say you're in acceptance. But are you really? Or have you just learned to put pretty names on what you still haven't had the courage to face? Jung insisted, you cannot attain consciousness without pain. People will do everything, no matter how absurd, to avoid confronting their own soul. And that's exactly what we see. People talking about gratitude but with a dry heart. People talking about purpose but living for appearances. People talking about healing the world but unable to be present with their own pain. That spiritual mask is comfortable. No one questions you. You gain admiration. You become a reference, but deep down you feel like you're still running because you are. And the more you run from real pain, the more fragile the armor becomes, until one day it breaks. A breakup, a loss, a panic attack, a betrayal, something that escapes your control. And then you realize that all that light you were carrying was just a way to avoid looking into the darkness. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to be a master, a healer, a shaman, a therapist, or a guru. You just need to have the courage to feel, to make mistakes, to say, "I don't know," to look inward without a script, because true awakening is not a spiritual resume. It is an internal demolition. It's shedding yourself layer by layer until what's left is what has no name, what was always there before the beliefs, before the doctrines, before the goals of personal growth. And Jung knew that this is terrifying because it is raw, it is naked, it is too simple for the sophisticated ego to accept. That's why many prefer the fantasy. They claim to be in the fifth dimension, but can't take care of their own bodies. They preach acceptance, but live in competition. They talk about vibration, but avoid any conversation that goes below the surface. It's a bubble. And like any bubble, sooner or later it bursts. But that's not a mistake. It's an opportunity, because when the mask falls, you can finally begin. Jung said that salvation is in the mud. It's in humanity, in imperfection, in the inner chaos, where the truly sacred resides. The spirit is not separate from the flesh. The soul does not reject pain. It just needs you to stop pretending that you don't feel it. Do you want to awaken? Then descend. Descend into your anger, descend into your lack, descend into your jealousy, your envy, your most shameful desires. Descend to that point where you hate yourself and stay there. Stay. Don't run, don't explain, don't interpret, just be. It is there, in that not knowing, in that absolute discomfort, where awakening truly begins. Everything else is just an act. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, but not a common mirror. A mirror that doesn't reflect your image, but what you refuse to see your entire life. That is the moment that Carl Jung both feared and, at the same time, sought with a scientific and almost mystical devotion. The moment when the unconscious, that immense living, pulsating force, rises like an ocean that overflows the mind. You feel it. It's not something you think. It's something that takes over your body. Your sleep changes. Your dreams become dense, symbolic, and disturbing. You begin to be invaded by impulses, memories, images, and emotions that make no sense but haunt you. Jung called this the collision with the unconscious and said that in that instant, you either submerge or you go crazy trying to swim against it. The unconscious is everything you hid. The childhood you didn't want to remember, the desires you learned to repress, the shame you turned into pride, the pains you covered with phrases to avoid feeling. It's all there, and it waits. It waits for the moment when your defense structure weakens. It waits for grief. It waits for burnout. It waits for separation. It waits for the fall. And when the ego cracks, it arrives. And what does it bring with it? It brings the shadowy, but not evil, not external wickedness. It brings your own darkness, your envy, your falsehood, your desire for control, your emotional manipulation, your lack disguised as love, and you are terrified because you always believed you were a good person. You always tried to do the right thing. You always wanted to help, but now you see the other side. You see that your altruism was full of lack. You see that your kindness was a bartering chip. You see that the love you gave was often a desperate attempt to be seen. And then you come into conflict with everything, with your beliefs, with your morals, with your identity. This is where many people go crazy, not in the clinical sense, but in the existential one, because that internal revelation breaks the ground beneath your feet. But Jung knew that the true self is not born from control. It is born from the relationship with the unconscious. And that relationship begins with listening. You start to observe your dreams not as nighttime nonsense, but as coded messages from your soul. You begin to see patterns in your behaviors. You start to notice that the same types of people appear, that the same dramas repeat themselves, and you understand. Nothing is a coincidence. Everything is a reflection. You begin to notice that what irritates you most in others is what you have most repressed in yourself. You begin to understand that your shadow is not a demon. It is a scared child, hungry for recognition. But recognizing that hurts, because it means admitting that you lived a half-life, that you played a role while the real character was screaming from behind the scenes. Jung said, the shadow is 90% gold, but no one teaches you that. Most doctrines, philosophies, and religions want you to fight your shadow. They tell you to overcome it, to transcend it, to purify yourself. But Jung wanted you to know it, to have coffee with it. He wanted you to listen to its stories, to let it speak without censorship, without fear, because only then can you integrate it and become whole. And it is here that the abyss reveals its paradox. The more you submerge, the more parts of you emerge, not because the pain disappears, but because you stop fragmenting yourself trying to seem good. You become authentic, imperfect, but complete. Anger stops being repression and becomes strength. Sadness stops being weakness and becomes truth. Fear stops being a prison and becomes a portal. And then you begin to understand that the unconscious was never your enemy. It was your hidden ally, the part of you that held everything you weren't ready to feel. But now you are, and that's why it came. But be careful, because at this point, the ego can try to regain control. It may want to use the unconscious to feel special, profound, awake, and thus you fall back asleep. Only this time, within a more sophisticated dream. That's why he said, the self does not tolerate lies. It demands total honesty with yourself. And that honesty is brutal. It is having the courage to say, I manipulated, I sabotaged myself, I hid, I betrayed myself. But after that, you free yourself, not from the pain, but from the denial. And that changes everything. Music dying without dying, disintegrating inside without anyone noticing outside. Being forced to abandon all certainties and still continuing to breathe, that's how true transformation happens. Most people never go through this, not because they can't, but because they are unwilling to lose what they have built. They prefer the stability of falsehood to the instability of truth. They prefer the security of the mask to the abyss of self-knowledge. But those who endure the journey return different, or rather they don't return, because what dies in the process cannot be rebuilt. The old ego, with its roles, titles, desires, and fears, disintegrates like paper in flames. And when the fire goes out, what remains is not a new version of you. It's the essence that was always there, buried under the layers of the persona. Carl Jung called this the integration of the self. It's when you stop being a collage of external expectations and become a core of real consciousness. But don't be fooled. This does not bring eternal peace, it brings clarity. You no longer live seeking approval. You no longer fit into groups that demand your emotional amputation. You no longer negotiate your boundaries for crumbs of acceptance. You become a stranger to the world, to old friends, to family, and even to yourself, because what is reborn no longer recognizes the language of disguise. You start to speak more slowly, to listen more to silence, to tolerate lies less, to notice more clearly who is close for love and who is there for convenience. Real awakening does not turn you into someone special. It doesn't give you a sparkle in your eyes or an air of superiority. It breaks you until the only thing left is the truth. And the truth, as Jung said, makes people uncomfortable. You are going to make people uncomfortable. You are going to seem different. You are going to be accused of being cold, distant, arrogant. But that will no longer be a problem because you no longer need to please, to convince, or to save. You no longer want to be a light for anyone. You just want to exist without having to dim your own flame so that others feel comfortable. That is where the awakening stabilizes, not as an ecstasy, but as a silent clarity. You begin to choose differently. You walk away from toxic environments without guilt. You say no with the firmness of someone who loves themselves. You remain silent where you once tried to prove your existence. And more than anything, you stop searching because you realize that there is no place to arrive at. You are already there. You always were. Jung said, "What you most seek is right where you least desire to look." And now you have looked, you have seen, you have crossed through. The ego died, not as a defeated enemy, but as a liberated servant because it fulfilled its role. It protected you when you were too fragile to know who you were. But now you have grown, and what is born is not someone perfect. It is someone complete. Someone who can make mistakes, stumble, start over without losing themselves. Real consciousness is not a place where you live without pain. It is where you feel everything with dignity. It is where you love without abandoning yourself. It is where you care without emptying yourself. It is where you give yourself without dissolving. It is where you exist, not as a function, but as a presence. And that, my friend, is a one-way street. Someone who truly awakens can no longer pretend. They can no longer remain asleep in the same habits, in the same dynamics, in the same silent agreements of self-abandonment. Someone who awakens does not become enlightened. They catch fire, and like every flame, they begin to burn everything that is a lie. Sikhi. You didn't get here by chance. No one listens to this type of content just out of curiosity. You got here because something inside you, perhaps something you can't name yet, has already begun to awaken. Maybe it wasn't with flashes or mystical visions. Maybe it started with a different kind of tiredness, a boredom that doesn't go away, a constant feeling that something is missing that you've never had. If you listen to the end, it's because in some way you are already in the midst of the process, and now you know it. It's not pretty, it's not light, but it's real. Carl Jung said that the process of individuation, that return to the essence, is like crossing a dark sea with no guarantee of reaching the other shore. You are going to lose friends. You are going to break invisible contracts. You are going to disappoint expectations. You are going to be called strange, cold, arrogant, different. And all of that will only be a sign that you are becoming whole. Because the price of authenticity is the loss of all the versions of you that were created to please others. And you know what? It's worth it. I remember the first time I realized that there was something wrong with me, or rather, with the self I had built. It was one of those early morning bouts of insomnia, the kind where the silence screams. I sat on the floor of the room and started to cry, not out of sadness, but out of exhaustion. Exhaustion from holding the pose, from feigning sanity, from pretending that everything was fine. There, on that cold, damp floor, I understood what Jung meant by, the shadow needs to be integrated, not fought, because everything I feared most wasn't the world. It was truly looking at myself, without a manual, without escape, without personas. It was there that everything began to fall apart, and it was there that everything began to make sense, but not a sense that could be explained. It was a sense that only silence understood. That's why, if you're in this process, I thank you not only for being here, but for having the courage not to run away. This channel, this video, this space are just reflections of the same process that is happening inside you. You are not alone, and maybe for the first time, you are truly with yourself. Oh, and if you already understand that feeling less isn't coldness, it's power. Don't leave without watching the full content. Just click the link in the description or in the first pinned comment to access it now. And now that wonderfully ridiculous moment has arrived where I have to remind you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Yes, I know. After diving into the unconscious, facing the death of the ego, and being reborn in silence, the idea of pressing a like button even seems offensive. But guess what? The algorithm has no soul, and I still don't know how to speak to it in symbolic language. So give me a hand. Leave a comment with the phrase, "I survived my own awakening." If you've made it this far, you know the weight that carries. And if you want to take the next step, there's a video already appearing on the screen. I'm not going to tell you what it's about. I'll just give you one warning. It's not going to let you sleep soundly.